All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into something I think a lot of people are curious about.
Oh, yeah.
Long term, Tesla Model 3 ownership.
Okay.
You hear all this hype when a new model comes out, but what's it really like to live with one of these things for years and
Right.
years?
Get past the honeymoon phase.
Exactly. So we're going to break down an article about an owner named Lawrence, who's driven his Model 3 over 155,000 miles,
Wow.
which is, let me do the math here, that's 250,000 kilometers for all you metric folks out there.
That's a lot of driving.
It is. And he's done it all in almost 6 years.
So he's really put it through its paces.
Big time. So the big question is EV ownership really all it's cracked up to be after all that time?
I'm on the edge of my seat already. Let's dive in.
All right, so Lawrence got his Model 3 back in September 2018.
Okay.
And right off the bat, the question everyone has about EVs is the battery.
Of course.
How's that thing holding up after all those miles?
Well, the article says his battery has degraded by about 8 to 10%. But the Tesla app suggests it might be a little higher, closer to 11%.
So what does that even mean, like, in real-world driving?
Yeah, that's the thing. People get really hung up on those percentages.
Right. Like, is the car going to suddenly die on me?
No. It's not like that.
Okay, good.
What it really affects is your range.
So, like, how far you can drive on a full charge.
Exactly. So let's say your Model 3 originally had a range of 300 miles.
Right.
With that 10% degradation, you might only get like 270 miles now.
Oh, okay. So not a huge difference.
Right. It's gradual and manageable.
But I've also heard that how you charge your EV can impact the battery.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
And Lawrence, this guy, he loves using superchargers,
Those Tesla fast chargers.
which some people say are harder on the battery than slower charging.
There's this myth that supercharging will kill your battery fast.
I've heard that too.
It is true that it generates more heat, which can speed up degradation.
Mm-hmm.
But Tesla has these amazing thermal management systems to keep the battery cool.
Like a computer fan, basically.
Yeah, kind of. It regulates the temperature and prevents overheating.
So even though Lawrence is basically a supercharging addict,
Right.
his battery degradation is pretty normal.
Yeah, he even said it might only be 1% or 2% different from people who mostly slow charge.
Interesting. So maybe supercharging isn't as bad as we thought?
It's definitely not the battery killer some people make it out to be.
Okay, but now I'm curious about the cost of owning an EV long term.
Right. Everyone worries about those expensive batteries.
Yeah, and all the fancy tech that could break down.
Well, you might be surprised to hear this, but Lawrence has only spent about $1,000 on repairs in almost 6 years.
Wait, seriously?
Yep.
That's less than I spent on coffee.
Haha. That's pretty amazing.
So what did he even have to fix?
The biggest expense was a charging port replacement that was about $600.
Okay.
Then he replaced the 12-volt battery. EVs still have those.
Oh, right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, just a small one for like the electronics and stuff. That was about $125.
And then what?
Oh, and a few $100 to replace some suspension parts they were squeaking.
The joys of car ownership.
Right, and of course, regular tire changes.
So basically just normal car stuff.
Yeah, pretty much.
But hold on. What about all the expensive engine maintenance you have to do with a gas car?
That's the beauty of EVs.
Yeah,
No oil changes, no spark plugs, none of that.
because there's no engine.
Exactly. Way fewer moving parts means way less to break down.
So we're talking major savings in the long run.
Potentially huge savings, especially if you drive as much as Lawrence.
That's wild. Okay, so maybe EVs are good for your wallet,
Right.
but is it fun to drive after all that time?
Does it still have that new car magic?
Yeah, like does it feel worn out or anything?
Well, according to Lawrence, his Model 3 still feels 99% new.
Get out of here.
He says there's minimal wear and tear.
Wow. He's driven the equivalent of like 6 times around the earth.
It's pretty impressive.
And it still feels fresh.
It speaks to the quality of EV components and the build of the car itself.
That actually ties into something I read in the article.
Oh, yeah.
It said that 64% of people believe electric cars are the future of transportation.
Wow. That's a pretty big chunk of people.
Right? Like, what's driving that shift in opinion?
Well, there's definitely a growing awareness of climate change and the impact of fossil fuels.
Yeah, people are definitely more conscious of that now.
But it's not just about the environment. EV technology is getting so much better.
True, the range is longer, the charging is faster,
Exactly. And there are way more models to choose from now.
plus you can't deny the cool factor.
Oh, yeah. They're sleek and silent and packed with all the latest tech.
They just feel futuristic.
Definitely. But what do you think this shift in opinion means for the future of transportation?
Is this really an EV revolution in the making?
It's certainly pointing in that direction.
Yeah.
As battery tech keeps improving and they become more affordable,
Right.
I think we'll see a lot more people making the switch.
Especially with gas prices being what they are.
Yeah, that's a factor too.
Okay, so we've got this perfect storm brewing. People are interested, the tech is getting better, and it's becoming more affordable.
It's an exciting time to be following this industry.
It really is. But
Yeah.
what about the average person who's like on the fence about going electric?
I think stories like Lawrence's are so important for those people.
Yeah.
They provide a real glimpse into what long-term EV ownership actually looks like.
Okay, so let's recap what we've learned.
Right.
The battery, while it does degrade, might not be as big a deal as we thought.
Especially with those fancy thermal management systems keeping it cool.
Right, and repair costs for Lawrence have been shockingly low.
Way lower than a comparable gas car, probably.
Exactly, and he still loves driving his Model 3, even after putting enough miles on it to drive around the world 6 times.
It's pretty incredible.
It is, but it raises a big question for our listeners.
Oh,
Even with all these positives, is the Tesla Model 3 or any EV really the right choice for everyone?
that's the million-dollar question.
It is. You have to consider your own priorities, like what kind of driving do you do?
Right. What's your budget like?
What's the charging situation like where you live?
All those practical things.
Lawrence's experience gives us valuable insights,
Definitely.
but the decision to go electric ultimately depends on your individual needs and circumstances.
No one-size-fits-all answer.
So we've learned a lot from this deep dive into long-term Tesla Model 3 ownership.
But we have.
It seems like the reality can actually exceed the hype.
At least in Lawrence's case.
But more importantly, it highlights the need to really do your research.
Absolutely. Consider your own needs and make an informed decision.
And that's what the deep dive is all about, right?
Absolutely. We're here to spark your curiosity.
Give you the knowledge to make your own decisions.
And encourage you to think critically about the world around us.
Couldn't have said it better myself. All right, folks, that's it for part 1 of our deep dive into long-term Tesla Model 3 ownership, but we're not done yet.
Oh, no, there's more.
Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll delve even deeper into the world of EVs, exploring the latest battery tech charging infrastructure and the impact of electric vehicles on our transportation system as a whole.
It's going to be a wild ride.
Buckle up, and we'll see you there.
You know, it's funny. We were talking about all those concerns people have about EVs.
Yeah, like the battery dying and the repairs being super expensive.
Right. And Lawrence's experience just totally flips that on its head.
He spent like $1,000 in 6 years. That's crazy.
And that's the thing. Technology is always moving forward. Batteries are getting better. Those thermal management systems are getting smarter.
So maybe Lawrence's Model 3 is like a sneak peek into the future of EV ownership.
It's possible as more and more people start driving EVs and racking up those miles, we'll get a clearer picture of what to expect long term.
Speaking of which, we talked about that stat earlier. 64% of people think electric cars are the future of transportation.
Yeah, that's a huge number.
Why do you think so many people are on board with EVs now?
I think it's a mix of things for sure. Environmental concerns are a big one.
Definitely.
People are realizing we got to move away from fossil fuels.
Plus, EVs are just cool, let's be honest.
Uh-huh. Yeah, they've got that sleek, futuristic vibe.
But even with all that, they're still pretty expensive, right?
Yeah, that's a barrier for a lot of people.
Especially those fancy high-end models.
But as battery tech gets cheaper and we see more affordable EVs,
Right.
that's when things will really start to shift.
And we're starting to see that happen.
Slowly but surely.
So it sounds like we're headed in the right direction.
I think so. Between the growing demand, the improving tech, and the increasing affordability, it's all coming together.
It's an exciting time for sure. And stories like Lawrence's really helped to paint a realistic picture of what EV ownership can be like.
Absolutely. It's not just hype, it's real-world experience.
And that's what we need more of.
Exactly, to show people that EVs are a viable option.
So we've talked about battery degradation and cost, but what about the overall driving experience?
Yeah, does that new car feeling really last?
Lawrence said his Model 3 still feels 99% new after 6 years.
I mean, that's insane.
It is. It really makes you think about the long-term value of an EV compared to a gas car.
With a gas car, you're kind of expecting it to fall apart eventually.
Right. You'll have those big repair bills down the line.
But if EVs can hold up like this, it changes the whole game.
Imagine a world where cars are built to last.
It's a pretty wild thought.
It is. Instead of buying a new car every few years, what if we had cars that we could keep for decades?
Pass them down to our kids even.
That would be crazy. It would totally change our relationship with cars.
It's a paradigm shift.
And maybe that's what Lawrence's Model 3 represents.
A glimpse into that future.
It's definitely food for thought.
It is, and that's what I love about these deep dives. It challenges us to think differently about the world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Uh,
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but there's one more thing I want to touch on before we wrap up this part.
okay, what's that?
Well, Lawrence mentioned that he didn't really have to do much maintenance on his car until it hit like 145,000 miles.
That's pretty remarkable.
But it got me thinking, do you think we might lose something as EVs become more mainstream?
Like what?
That hands-on connection with our cars,
I see what you're saying.
Like I remember growing up, my dad was always tinkering with our car in the garage.
Yeah, it was a bonding experience for a lot of people.
It was, and I learned so much from just watching him.
There's definitely a certain nostalgia associated with that.
And I wonder if that's going to disappear with EVs.
You're not going to be changing your own oil or spark plugs on an electric car.
Exactly. So where does that connection go?
I think it might evolve into something different.
Okay, how they?
Instead of mechanical tinkering, it might become more about understanding the software, the data, the energy management systems.
So instead of getting greasy, you're diving into the code.
Exactly. And there's a whole world of possibilities there, customizing performance settings, optimizing energy consumption, troubleshooting glitches.
It's like a different kind of car enthusiast.
Exactly, one who's more tech savvy.
It's fascinating to think about how this shift to EVs could impact car culture as a whole.
It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
I'm excited to see what the future holds.
Me too. And remember, the automotive landscape is always changing.
True.
Just like we went from horses to cars, we're now going from gas to electric.
And who knows what's next.
It's an exciting time to be alive, that's for sure.
It really is. We've covered a lot of ground here, from battery life to cost to the potential evolution of car culture.
I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about.
I hope so. But before we move on to part 3, I want to leave everyone with a little something to ponder.
Okay, hit me with it.
As we've seen with Lawrence's experience, the world of electric vehicles is full of surprises. It's a rapidly evolving landscape that challenges our assumptions about what's possible, but it's important to remember that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. So my challenge to you, dear listener, is to keep an open mind, stay informed, and critically evaluate the information you encounter. The future of transportation is being written right now, and your choices will play a role in shaping it.
Well said. That's a powerful message.
It is, and I think it's a perfect segue into part 3, where we're going to shift gears a bit and explore another fascinating aspect of EV ownership that often gets overlooked. So, we were just talking about how EVs might change our relationship with cars.
Yeah, that whole idea of losing that hands-on connection.
And it made me think about something else.
What's that?
What about the environmental impact of making all these batteries?
Yeah, that's a big one.
It seems kind of counterintuitive, right?
Right.
We're trying to save the planet, but then we're mining all these rare earth minerals.
It's a valid concern. There's definitely an environmental cost associated with EV battery production.
So how do we balance that, the benefits of driving electric versus the impact of making the batteries?
It's a complex issue. There's no easy answer.
I bet.
But there are a few things to consider.
Okay, like what?
First of all, mining and manufacturing processes are constantly improving.
So it's getting cleaner.
Exactly. Companies are finding ways to reduce their environmental footprint.
That's good to hear.
And there's a lot of research going into alternative battery chemistries.
Oh, yeah. Like those solid-state batteries everyone's talking about.
Right. Those have the potential to be more sustainable and less reliant on rare earth minerals.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
Definitely not. It's a challenge, but it's one that the industry is actively working to address.
Okay, that makes me feel a bit better.
And remember, even with the environmental costs of battery production, EVs still come out ahead of gas cars over their entire lifespan.
Because driving electric doesn't produce any tailpipe emissions.
Exactly, and the electricity used to charge them is getting cleaner all the time as we transition to renewable energy sources.
So it's a big picture thing.
It is. You got to look at the whole life cycle of the vehicle.
Well, I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this topic.
There's so much more to explore.
It's a rabbit hole for sure.
But I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about.
Definitely. We've covered everything from battery degradation to the cost of ownership to the environmental impact.
And we've challenged some common assumptions along the way.
Which is what we love to do here on The Deep Dive.
Absolutely. We're all about sparking curiosity and encouraging critical thinking.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
All right, go for it.
The world of EVs is constantly evolving. It's full of challenges and opportunities, and it's ultimately up to each of us to decide how we want to participate in this transportation revolution. So stay informed, stay curious, and keep asking questions, because the future is electric, and it's happening now.
That's a great way to end this deep dive.
I think so, too. All right, folks, that's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.